This fishtail texture could also represent several other objects like pine cones, snake skin, lizard skin, and even some bird feathers. I use a variety of techniques to produce my fish scales: curved skew edging, a flat safety line using a writer or a shader, gradient fill, and scraping to establish a light, sharp edge. At the very least, fish scale can be burnt with a writing tip alone, but it won't look as realistic. To burn the scales using my method, you'll need a skew and a shader, and optionally a writing tip, or the toe of a shader, as you'll see later on. To start with, form the arch pattern of the scales with a skew. The arches in this pattern do take some practice and concentration to burn neatly. This is because we're using a skew which has a knife-like blade. Think of this like an ice skate trying to turn on the smooth rink surface. The skate blade wants to run straight, so to turn smoothly, the blade has to be turned in the direction you want to travel. This is also true in pyrography, where if you want to burn a curve with the skew, you must roll the pen body between thumb and forefinger, rotating in the direction that you want it to curve. It is also true that you can do a tighter turn by allowing less of the blade to be sunk into the wood or the object that you are burning. By having less blade sunk into the surface, you can more tightly turn without fear of the blade getting caught and wanting to run in a straight line. Because the skew needs to be pulled towards you, it is essential that you orientate your work so you can smoothly pull the pen and turn your fingers in a comfortable manner. Regarding what sort of skew to use, you can certainly use a straight skew, but I personally prefer a curved skew so that I can more easily control how much of the blade is sunk into the surface. If you're using a fixed tip burning pen, then I would suggest that you burn more with the toe of the blade so that you can control the tighter curve. I describe this next step as burning the safety line. This is the area that's overlapped by the scales above it. It is the area that's in the deepest shade, so the tone here will be the darkest. It's also an area that sits next to a crisp line. Because of this, it's very difficult to burn gradient shade outward without overstepping this crisp skew edge and encroaching on the overlapping scale. This safety line is burnt along the bottom of the curve of the skew arch. It's wide enough to create a pre-burnt touchdown area. This area is where the shading tip can be safely placed to start the stroke for the gradient fill. This gradient fill will form the basic tone or colour of the scales. This is formed by burning lines that radiate outward from the safety line and follow the shape of the scale. The safety line can be burnt by a variety of tips as long as the tip is wide enough to provide a touchdown point. In the following, I have used 3 types of tips to demonstrate burning the safety line. Flat shader. This is a flat shader and it easily runs along the crisp edge without fear of going over. If you tilt the flat shader towards the line, it will physically impress into the surface and give the scales a relief appearance. Writing tip. A writing tip can also be used, but it must burn a wide enough line to allow room for touchdown at the start of the gradient shading. Spoon shader. A spoon or a curved shader can be swept in any direction and leaves a soft burnt edge compared to the flat shader. The toe of the spoon shader can be used, as seen here, to burn the safety line. Gradient fill. Burning the gradient fill on these scales is much like shading. Shading is definitely one of the techniques that some people find the most challenging. If you're one of those people, trust me when I suggest the more you practice shading, the easier it will get. A shading tip is definitely the tool for this job. A fat writing tip can also be used, especially when burning smaller scales. Start the stroke on the safety line and radiate outward. Before reaching the outer edge, taper off the stroke by lifting the tip while in motion. This produces a stroke that fades off, leaving the outer edge unburnt. Keep repeating the strokes, each one abutting and slightly overlapping its neighbour. Curve the strokes to follow the flare shape of each scale. For solid point burners, I suggest using a tip that burns a wide and smooth line. Some things to note. Smooth gradient tone is best achieved by keeping the speed and rhythm of the stroke the same. Practice is a key to this, but several things also play an important part. Smooth surfaces offer less resistance. Less resistance equals a smooth stroke. Smoother strokes equal better rhythm. To achieve this, make sure your tip is clean and smooth, and also make sure the surface to be burnt on is finely sanded to allow the tip to pass easily over its surface. You can leave the project at this stage, but for further realism and punch, you can perform 2 additional steps. Firstly, use your shader to burn a light tone between the previously burnt gradient tone and the end of the scale. This will fill in the end of the scale with a light tone. Because you're now burning from one pre-burnt area and ending in another pre-burnt area, this light fill will be much easier to burn than the gradient tone previously burnt. To achieve the lighter tone, people with variable temperature burners will need to dial down the heat, and people with set temperature burners will have to increase the speed of their tip stroke. This contrast in tone helps each scale appear to pop out from one another. For added realism, I scrape one side of each scale more than the other, and this shows the direction of the light source.